Welcome back to the Go in the Match podcast. Today I'm joined by a Dortmund fan, Uli Hesse. Uli is a former columnist for ESPN and a match-going Dortmund fan. He also wrote a book on Dortmund, Building the Yellow Wall, which was the football book of the year in 2019. Uli, thanks for giving me time today, mate, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, Mike, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Okay, so I want you to take us back to your childhood and following Dortmund. Where were you born and how did your love for Dortmund begin?
I was born in Dortmund, actually, just a couple of miles north of the ground, actually. And normally when people ask me about this, I always say that, when, like me, you're born in Dortmund, there's no question about what sport you follow and which team you follow, because, to be honest, we don't have much else, in Dortmund. But there's a twist to the story, which I don't always tell because it's a bit complicated. But Since you ask, we moved away from Dortmund when I was about a year old. And we moved to a smaller town nearby called Unna. It's just 12 miles. But, when you're a kid, 12 miles is a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
If you want to go somewhere. So I grew up slightly outside of Dortmund, and my involvement with the club was more through my brother. My brother is 12 years older than I am. And he was always my big hero, he was one of the original Dortmund fans. Well, he was one of the Dortmund fans who set up the very first supporters club in Dortmund.
Oh, wow.
In the early 70s. And he traveled everywhere with the club back when they were in the second division. So in the early 70s. And, sometimes I would, my brother wouldn't be there and I would ask my mother, where's Klaus? And she would say, well, he's traveling with Borussia Dortmund. And, I didn't really know what it meant, but it sounded fantastic. So I thought, when I'm growing up, I want to travel with Borussia Dortmund, whatever exactly that means. So it was really through my brother. I mean, most in the town where I grew up, almost everybody was a Dortmund supporter. Although we had a couple of Bayern fans, as you would, a couple of Gladbach fans, because the 70s, Gladbach was the big team in Germany, and a few Schalke fans. But it was because it was only 12 miles, and most everybody else was a Dortmund fan. So that, and in combination with sort of my family history, my brother, that was how I became a Dortmund fan.
Yeah. So can you remember like the first match you went to, or does anything stand out?
Oh yeah. I actually wrote a very small piece about it back in, when was that? God, it was in the 90s, because I was writing for a Dortmund fanzine at the time. So I saw my first game at the ground shortly before my 12th birthday. So this is late January 1977. As I said, normally when you're from Dortmund, you normally go to the games earlier. But since we lived 12 miles outside of Dortmund, I didn't know how to go to the games. Mm-hmm. Now you probably say, well, your brother could have taken you with him. But no, in the mid 70s, he was like, 23, 24. And that would have been his worst nightmare, taking his kid brother to a game. But my sister, she lived in Dortmund at the time. She'd moved away. She lived in Dortmund. And so it was sort of a birthday present for me.
Okay.
So we went to a game, my sister, her boyfriend at the time, and me. And of course, we went to the south stand, to the terrace. So I had a small folding chair. Is that the word for it? Folding chair? Because, you need something to stand on. Now, the punchline of that first game is it was Dortmund's first season back in the Bundesliga. They'd been relegated in 72. Mm-hmm. They won promotion in 76. So 76, 77, that was the first season back in the Bundesliga. And they weren't very good, of course. They were a promoted team. They did okay. And I was very, very excited. And my sister was really worried about me, not because of, the crowd and the people and everything. She was really worried that I would be disappointed, because I'd only seen football on television. So all the way to the ground, she kept telling me that, it's not like football on television. She kept saying that on television you only see the highlights, but real football games can be very boring.
All 90 minutes.
Sometimes there's nothing happening for like 30 minutes. So by the time we got to the ground, I was convinced it would be a 0-0 draw. And the final scoreline was 7-2. There were 9 goals. It was almost non-stop excitement. It was actually better than any highlight reel I'd ever seen on television.
Yeah.
So it was just fantastic. Actually, it was not long ago, I think only a couple of years ago, that the club issued a DVD collection with match highlights. And that was the first time since 1977 that I saw the game again. And it was, God, what I didn't remember was the state of the pitch. This was late January, and you're probably too young to remember that. But back in the 70s and 80s, they would play on it was a mud bath, really. They wouldn't even start games today on a pitch like that. It was really astonishing to see that. And it reminded me of, going to games back then, and yes, about that the conditions were often very, very rough and totally unlike today.
So when you went to your first game then and you watched Dortmund, was that just you hooked then? You just fell in love with them and there was no other club that you would ever support?
Yeah, but I'd been a fan before. I mean, I went to the game because I wanted to see Dortmund, We could have gone, Dortmund is in the Ruhr. I sometimes, if people don't quite know where that is, the core area, the Ruhr area in Germany, I sometimes tell them it's a bit like Greater London.
Okay.
Only you can travel much easier from one place to another because of all those German motorways.
Yeah.
And it's also a bit like Greater London because of the large number of clubs that you have. When I grew up and Dortmund were playing away, I would just go to some other club. Bochum is 30 minutes away, or Duisburg, or Essen, or even Oberhausen, or whatever. So in the area where we live, where I grew up, it was quite easy to go to a Bundesliga game.
Yeah.
So it was not the Bundesliga game as such that I wanted to experience. It was, I wanted to go and see a Dortmund game. I remember we just a couple of months ago, we did a story. I now work for a magazine, and we had the idea of asking readers to send us their scrapbooks. Do you know what that is? Normally when you're a kid and you would, have scrapbooks, collect stuff and like autograph cards or tickets or match reports or whatever. And I volunteered because I still had my scrapbook. And that started, so I had started the Dortmund scrapbook way before I saw my first game. So because, you can, I'd totally forgotten about it, but when you open the scrapbook, you can see the newspaper clippings and everything. So they're all, I don't know, from 76 or 75 or whatever.
So the yellow wall that you have at Aduna Park is very similar to the cop that we have at Anfield. So obviously you can see it from the atmosphere is amazing. I've never been myself, but it's always something I've always wanted to do. What is the main reason, do you feel, that makes the atmosphere so unique?
Well, one thing is quite obviously that such huge terraces have become, rare, or does not even begin, to describe it. I mean, you come from a country where they're practically extinct,
Yeah, safe
I traveled to Celtic a couple of years ago when they reintroduced safe standing, and but of course there was, no comparison to what the jungle used to be like, at Celtic Park. So that's of course one thing, just to have in this time and day, just to have a huge terrace like this is almost unheard of. It's always described as the biggest in Europe, and I always wonder, well, which one is bigger? I actually can't think of a bigger one. So that's that's of course one thing. The other thing is that Dortmund is one of those places where, now I'm not sure if you can really compare it to Liverpool, because I know that football means a lot to Liverpool, and I've been there a couple of times, and I know how passionately people feel about football. But there's a couple of other things you would think about when you think about Liverpool. I don't know, music, for instance, or whatever. or the Harbour, or there's
Yeah.
lots of things people think about when they hear the word Liverpool. But when you hear Dortmund, you only think about football.
Yeah.
And I think everybody who comes from Dortmund is quite aware of that we don't really have anything else that people will know about the city. So so the club really means a lot to
The people.
well, it's that kind of city where the club really means an awful lot. Also because unlike Liverpool, of course, we don't have a second club.
Yeah, so it's like the people of the city, they're so passionate and they're so proud of their football. It's their be-all and end-all. You touched on safe standing there in the Bundesliga and specifically at Dortmund. Do you feel, I know there's a couple of clubs, smaller clubs in England that are trying to start getting that in there now. There's been discussions at Anfield, but obviously it's a very sensitive topic for us. Do you feel that would help the atmosphere with the English clubs?
Yeah, well, certainly it would. I mean, one thing is we in Germany, we don't say safe standing. We say standing.
Just stand. Yeah.
Because it's always people sometimes ask me about this, and it's kind of, so what happened in Germany in the Bundesliga was not sort of that, I don't know, we reintroduced standing or whatever. It just never went away.
Yeah.
So the the ground was rebuilt, of course, enlarged. I mean, when you watch the yellow wall today, when you watch really closely, and of course you have to watch when the stadium is empty, you will see that it's actually two yellow walls or two stands, because they added the second tier in the 90s when the ground was, when Dortmund were, close to world domination, or so they thought, and built this really huge thing. But the lower part of the south stand is still exactly the way it was when I first went there in 1977. The crush barriers are still there, the rails are still there, the steps, of course. So it's just it didn't go away. But of course, we never had a traumatic experience. We never had a Hillsborough or a Heysel or a disaster like that. So I'm always very reluctant to make a statement about that. To say, all I can say is that, in all honesty, I'm not sure I would go and see my club every time I can if I wouldn't be allowed to stand, if you know what I mean.
No.
I mean, it's not the money, it's not that I couldn't afford a ticket for the seated area, but it's just, for me, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like, it's not the way you should watch football. I always feel, now I'm a professional journalist, so I often sit in the press stand, and it always feels strange. It's always a bit artificial, or it's just not the way I would want to watch a game.
Yeah.
So I've often when I'm asked to cover Dortmund professionally, they will send me a press ticket, but I will have my season ticket and just stand on the south stand, because that's the way I like it,
I think the problem we have at Anfield is, even though there is seating in the Kop, people still stand. So that's where the problem is, So in my opinion, I'd probably say I can speak for most Liverpool fans. The safest thing would be to put safe standing in there, or as you just say, standing, because people stand anyways, even though there's seats, which makes it more dangerous. So I think a lot of the English fans look at teams like Dortmund, even Celtic, and when you see it, that it works, and it works so well. But not only that it works, but it helps the atmosphere as well.
So that's actually how the Celtic fans sold it to the club and the league. They told me that that they went to the club and said exactly what you said. They said, listen, we have these seats, but nobody uses them. Everybody's standing anyway. Yeah. And it's only a question of time until somebody falls down and we have a serious accident here. So it's actually safer to have a standing area.
Yeah.
You can probably look this up somewhere on the internet. I once did admittedly, it was for a derby against Schalke, so it was an extra special game. I took two English fans, not friends, but acquainted people I knew quite well. I took them to a game, and there were two Villa fans. And they were starting with me, and one of them said that there was absolute. Well, of course they loved it, and they said it was absolutely fantastic. And one of them said that all seaters staying here ruined the atmosphere at football games for him. And he said it's only when you, I mean, he sort of, in a way, he said it's only when you then go to a place like Dortmund that you realize how bad the atmosphere has become. And of course, he went to the Holte End as a kid, and when Villa still had a terrace of their own. And yeah.
Wow. So you've wrote multiple books on German football, but Building the Yellow Wall, which was voted the football book of the year in 2019, how did that come about? And for people that may not know or may not have read it, what can people expect when they read that book?
How did it come about? This is a good question. I mean, it's a long story, actually. I wrote a book about the history of German football in English called Tor. Then I wrote a couple of German books, and then I worked on an English book with a friend of mine, Paul Simpson, who used to edit 442 magazine. And then after that, I thought I should do a book again in English. I would like to do that. And the idea that I had at the time, which was 7 years ago, there was this buzz around Dortmund, and with Jurgen Klopp as the manager, and a really young team, a not very expensive team, going to the Champions League final. And I had an idea to do a Dortmund book then. And for various reasons, it didn't work out. It didn't happen. Then I did a book about Bayern Munich that was quite well received. And after that, I thought, well, maybe let's go back to the Dortmund idea again. And I think because the Bayern book was quite well received, we found a publisher. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. I mean, what people, and the interesting, not interesting, not necessarily interesting, but what I found out was that it was totally different doing the Dortmund book to most of the other football books I'd done before. Not so much because it's my club, but because, when you do a book like Bayern, which is more or less a straight club history, and they're a very, very successful club, of course, you kind of almost don't have any time to write about, to put the atmosphere in the book or background, or because you're just going from one final to the next, from one trophy to the next, because so much has happened in Bayern's history. So the Dortmund book is totally different. This is more it's in a way it's to the club history, but it's also history of the people and the city and the region and the relationship between the club and the people and the region. I like to think it's a football book in which the fans are almost as important as the players are or the coaches are, which is in a way which befits the club, because the interesting thing is that Dortmund have become, I hesitate to say this, coming from the city myself, but it's become a bit of a cult club, a hipsters' favorite club, and we don't always like that, but that's the way it is, and that happened even though the club aren't hugely successful. It's not like they're winning the league every year or and haven't won a European trophy since 1997, and still people outside of Germany seem to really like the club, and that has to do with things that go beyond what happens on the pitch. So I try to explain that or highlight that or write about that.
Yeah, so it's not just about the football, but it's about the city and the people that live in it and the whole culture and everything as well. I think you wrote in there as well, I believe, about when Dortmund were quite financially struggling. Did Bayern Munich give them a loan at some point to take them out?
Yeah, that story is, for some reason, that story seems to fascinate people, especially in England, but people from abroad. Bayern did give them a loan. It was not as if Bayern bailed them out. It was it was, I think it was 2 million euros, and it was not a sum that, you know, would have saved the club or anything.
Yeah. Just a helping hand.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a coffee. Yeah, I'm sorry. You can.
Just a helping hand.
Sorry. Yeah, it is interesting, of course, because the two clubs are now fierce rivals, and yeah, they also were fierce rivals at the time, and also because Bayern at that time had any right in the world to be a little bit miffed about Dortmund, you know, because they had signed, well, Sebastian Kehl, who later became captain of Dortmund, he had signed an agreement with Bayern. Okay. You know, one of those written things where he received money in return for, you know, pledging his signature to Bayern. And then he changed his mind. Then he gave back the money and joined Dortmund. And Bayern were not happy about that. And a couple of years later, you know, Dortmund then, by and large, asked Bayern for, you know, for a loan. So, which in effect was like they needed the money, you know, to pay the wages of the player they'd stolen from Bayern. Mm-hmm. So it was a bit, you know,
tense.
Yeah, a bit cheeky. And Bayern would have had any right in the world to say no. But they're also, I mean, well, as you will know, there are very many people in Germany who have very strong feelings about Bayern. But they are, or have been, for the last few decades, the sort of club that will help other clubs in need. So they've done a lot of things like that.
A lot of respect. So obviously I'm a massive Liverpool fan myself, been going to Anfield since I was little. And it's very clear that both Liverpool and Dortmund have this connection between not only the club, but the fans as well. You know, we both share You Never Walk Alone. Jurgen Klopp's been at both clubs. I went to the match at Anfield in 2016 where we played each other in the Europa League. And You Never Walk Alone at full time was the best I've witnessed at Anfield. But the great thing I noticed was even though Dortmund got beat, they were still singing at the end of the game, You Never Walk Alone. How do you, as a Dortmund fan, view the relationship between the two clubs?
Well, first, let me say that I'm not a big fan of You Never Walk Alone. Actually, let me rephrase that. I'm not a big fan of the fact that it's become, you know, such a big song in Dortmund.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a Liverpool song, and I don't really think we should sing it.
How did it come about? How did Dortmund end up singing that? Is there a story behind it?
It was a bit of a fad in the 90s. The story is in the book, for instance. That's one of the stories that's in the book. Sort of story, which I think, you know, which is a good example for what the book is like. You know, because it's actually this goes back to St. Pauli. Actually, St. Pauli have a sort of fan friendship with Celtic, and St. Pauli fans went there, and you know, St. Pauli have these punk rock roots. You know, so after they went there, and I think they brought with them a season review videotape, and You'll Never Walk Alone was on that, and then a German punk band picked that up and did a cover version of that. They started playing that at St. Pauli games, and that was in the 90s when, you know, when this big football boom started, when suddenly, you know, the hooligan years were over, and football became really, you know, fanzines sprang up and everything. And it was just picked up around the league, and there were quite a few clubs who suddenly started playing You'll Never Walk Alone before the games. Yeah. But Dortmund were one of the clubs that had just stuck with it, you know. Although I was once at a talk show, a radio talk show, where an Arsenal fan said that we, meaning Dortmund, should get a club song of our own. So I reminded him that it's not our club song, you know, unlike Liverpool. When you go to a Dortmund game, you will notice that they play You'll Never Walk Alone at a certain point before the game. But it's not the song they play directly before kickoff.
Right.
They play a song called Hey BVB, which goes back to the 70s. And that's the club song. Mm. The relationship, I mean, I've always had a soft spot for Liverpool, and that's absolutely true, you know. for a number of reasons. I think mainly it's because, well, no, there's two reasons. One is, of course, that what is to this day still one of the most important games in club history for Dortmund was against Liverpool in 1966, when Dortmund became the first German club to win a European trophy at Hampden Park against a favoured Liverpool side, I have to say. Bill Shankly's Liverpool. So there was, from that point on, always, whenever I would read about Dortmund as a kid, that game would come up, and I would just remember that name, Liverpool. Then, of course, for people of my generation, I mean, well, for instance, for my son, who was born in 1990, for him, I'm sorry to say that, but the big English club is Manchester United, because they were, the big team when he grew up.
Yeah.
But for me, it was Liverpool, of course, because all through the 70s, and God, that makes me sound like an old man, which I am, but, and probably sick of hearing things like that. But back then, you really couldn't watch a lot of football on television. It was only during World Cups or during the later stages of the European Cup competitions. So Liverpool would be the one club I would see, and they were fantastic in the 70s. And it was really, actually shocking sometimes to see, how, well, not easily, but, they had these epic games against Gladbach, and we thought Gladbach was,
amazing.
The team of the 70s in Germany. And then they would come up against Liverpool, and everybody, all those players in red, they would look like, a lot taller, a lot stronger, a lot faster than all those Gladbach players. So, so that's my personal relationship with Liverpool. Mm-hmm. But I think in Dortmund, and I'm certainly, you'll bring that up in a minute or two, I think a lot of people in Dortmund found it very, very fitting that Klopp ended up at Liverpool, because there was, I don't know, it's not, there's some connection between the two clubs and maybe the two cities, I don't know, in a way, yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Jurgen Klopp there, so I can't have you on the podcast without talking about him. So he's seen as a god, basically, isn't he, in both our clubs? But before he joined Liverpool, did you ever feel that he would end up at Liverpool? And, because from my perspective, when he came into the club, I knew he would be a success. I didn't know necessarily that he would go on and win the Premier League, the European Cup, but I knew he would change where we were at that time. He kind of, and you'll probably say yourself, he embodies everything that you want as a fan on that touchline for your club.
Absolutely, though, to be honest, I wasn't that sure that he would be a success, mainly because language is so important to him. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but he's one of those, when you talk to him, there's two things that stand out. One is that he's got this total attention, very often when you talk to football people, after about, I don't know, a minute or two, their eyes will begin to wander, and you know that you're losing them in a way, but Klopp is not like that. He's always totally focused. And if you talk to him, he's only talking to you. And the other thing, of course, is that, in German, it was the amazing thing about him was that he always found a new way of saying something. He was a fantastic interviewee, just because he had that knack, He would, like everybody else, he would say, and then, we'll look from game to game or whatever. But he always said it in a different way. He never used the cliche. It was always, he had a funny turn of phrase. Anyway, language was just, to me, I think it was very important to him. So, and I wasn't sure if he would make that transition, in a language that just isn't his own, And then, when was that? It wasn't last season. It was the season before that. Then I went to Liverpool, and I had him to talk to him. And before that, there was a press conference after the game, and he came in, and it was exactly the way it had been in Germany. He was cracking jokes, and everybody was laughing, and I was really astonished. I mean, well, it wasn't, of course, the same because he was speaking English, but the way he interacted with people was exactly the way it had been in Germany. So that was very astonishing to see. But to answer your question, this is a true story. I have witnesses. I did a book with a friend of mine about Dortmund, which is an oral history book. So we went and talked to fans from the 1940s to the noughties, fans from all decades, and heard their stories. And then, it's an oral history book. And when that came out, we did sort of promotional tours and we would be interviewed and everything. And there was a magazine that said they wanted to interview us both, my friend Gregor and me, and they would send us a list of questions. So this was October 2013. And the last question on the list was, which team is Jürgen Klopp going to coach in 2016-17? And my friend Gregor, he replied, Borussia Dortmund or a foreign club. And then he made a remark about Bayern, but if he really joins Bayern, he cracked a joke about taking a voodoo course. And then, I don't know. Anyway, and my reply was Liverpool. That was all. And the guy who did the interview actually phoned me up a couple of years later when Klopp actually, signed for Liverpool. And he said, how did you know that? And I said, I didn't. Of course, I didn't know that. And it just felt, it was 3 or 4 years on. I don't know. I didn't. It just sounded like a good match, if you know what I mean. Maybe it's because the very first time I went to talk to him, I interviewed him for a Swedish magazine, actually.
All right, okay.
That was a couple of months before he won the league with Dortmund, so that must have been early 2011. And we talked about why he joined Dortmund, and he said, well, it had nothing to do with the money or anything. Then Dortmund's press officer was sitting next to us. And then Klopp turned to him and said, do you remember that the first time you sent me a contract offer, I wrote back and said, well, listen, guys, do you know that I'm making more money at Mainz in the second division now? And he said, yeah, that was true. But, well, they fixed it. So it wasn't about money or anything. But he said, and then he went into one of those Klopp talks, He said that whenever he was a coach for Mainz at Dortmund, and then he started, really, I would say, waxing poetically. He would say, like he was standing at the touchline, before the game started, and he would look at the south stand, and he would hear people singing, and he would think, God, what a great place to coach football in, not necessarily because it's about, silverware or championships, just to coach football for these people, there's 80,000 here, fantastic, Then he would tell me about, how much football meant to the Ruhr area, And he said, he came from an area where he's born in Stuttgart, where football is important, but not the be-all and end-all. And he said that he always wanted to coach a team in the Ruhr area, just because everybody there lives and breathes football.
Yeah.
So after that kind of talk, when you think, God, he's not going to coach Paris Saint-Germain or whatever, So at that time, maybe I just thought that Liverpool would be just a good match,
Yeah. It feels almost like from the outside, it kind of feels when he was at Dortmund, he has to have this connection with the fans and the club. And I know Man United tried to get him, and I think is it Uli, his wife, said that she didn't have a good feeling about it. And it almost feels like if he doesn't have that connection with the fans, he can't succeed. He knows he needs to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe it's maybe another reason why I said Liverpool is because there are some similarities between Liverpool and Dortmund in terms of the situation they were in.
Yeah.
When Klopp came, because a lot of people think that Dortmund signed Klopp to win trophies, but that was not the point. Of course, we thought we're a big club, and we thought we're, maybe a couple of years down the line we can challenge again. But Dortmund were coming off financially very lean years, which is the main reason the team was so young and so cheap. But the big point was that everybody at the club felt that everything had gone a bit stale, and that it wasn't necessarily about winning trophies, but about, doing things in style and entertaining people. And we had a couple of very bad coaches, in terms of, the football was not what people in Dortmund wanted to see. So, and I talked to Aki Watzke, the chairman, about this many years ago. And he said that whenever we played Mainz, whenever we played Klopp's team, we felt that we should beat these guys easily. But somehow it feels as if they've got an extra man on the pitch, And actually what I would like for Dortmund is to play that sort of football. So that's why they got him, to change things and then to shake up the club and, a breath of fresh air. He certainly did that. So everything else was just more or less on top.
So I do keep a close eye on Dortmund results because I've got a bit of a soft spot for them. So having Bayern Munich in your league, winning the league most years must be so frustrating for yourselves. What do you feel needs to be the main difference for Dortmund to go on to win the Bundesliga and kind of knock Bayern Munich off their perch, as it were?
That's difficult, of course. I mean, yes, it is frustrating, but I mean, probably very young fans may feel differently about it. But I think the vast majority of Dortmund fans still think that, it's not, we don't take winning championships or trophies for granted.
Yeah.
It's still not as if, now we are the second most successful club in Germany, but it's not as if we feel we have to win the league this year. So it's not frustrating in the sense that, we always end up usually one place behind Bayern. It's more frustrating in the sense that that a bit of excitement in the league has gone out of the league, and that it's more a sense of general frustration, not just Dortmund frustration. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's like a one-horse race, really.
I'm sorry.
It's very much like a one-horse race, like the French league's like that as well, isn't it? And Italy's been like that as well. So it's more of the whole Bundesliga perspective.
Yeah, but speaking for Dortmund, I mean, it was very close 2 years ago. They actually should have won the league 2 years ago. We held a 9-point lead over Bayern at one point, and then it basically came down to the derby, where we took a 1-0 lead and then lose the game and had 2 players sent off. If we won that, they would have won the league.
Yeah.
And a similar thing happened last year, not quite as dramatic, but Dortmund seemed to be doing quite well for a while. So there is the feeling that it's really, I mean, it's not out of the club's reach, certainly not. It's not like it's impossible to win the league. But the one thing, of course, is, I think there's 2 things. One thing, of course, is just the money. I mean, Dortmund are a very rich club by German standards, so which is a problem for the league, because we've now have too many divisions in the league, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, Bayern are financially far ahead of Dortmund, but then Dortmund are financially far ahead of most other clubs, almost all other clubs. So that's a problem that it's really hard. There's for instance, some people think it's for instance, a lot of people point towards the Premier League and say that it's different than the Premier League, and then the explanation is that we don't have owners, or we don't have club owners. Our clubs are not owned by businessmen or by companies. Which is known as the 50+1 rule. And there is a theory that says that no club is happier about the 50+1 rule than Bayern Munich, because it sort of cements their status. But then again, the vast majority of German fans are all for the 50+1 rule. So it's not as if, we really want to, change the system and allow sponsors or investors into the Bundesliga. the other thing is that, I blame it all on Pep Guardiola, because until 2013, it was the normal story. I mean, the Bundesliga is a strange league in that, unlike most other leagues, it has never really produced a small number of, clubs that are always there or thereabouts. So the story of the Bundesliga for most of its existence has been that there's Bayern Munich and one other club, and this other club usually changes. And for a while, for a very long time, this was perfectly okay, because Bayern were, they were mere mortals. I mean, clubs like Stuttgart and Wolfsburg won the league, not that long ago. Mm. And it's because Bayern would dominate for a couple of years, and they would have off years, like you do, like normal people do. They concentrate on the Champions League or whatever, or they have a couple of injury problems or whatever, and then somebody else wins the league. And that stopped. Yeah. I mean, it's probably a coincidence that it stopped with Pep Guardiola, but ever since 2013, Bayern have become this bizarre juggernaut. I mean, it's really uncanny.
Yeah. So finally, the podcast is centered around Going the Match. So with every podcast we're doing, I want to end by asking, what are your top 3 favorite matches you've been to? It doesn't have to be based on the 90 minutes itself. It can be based on something that happened during the day or for whatever reason.
Oh, this is a tough one.
In no particular order.
Dortmund games or?
Dortmund.
So Dortmund, okay. That makes it even tougher because I was going to say Salford City against Stockport County in the National League North in March 2017.
Really?
Yeah, because it was unforgettable because I went there for the magazine.
Okay.
Because you will know that Salford City are the club owned by the class of '92, and they were, they were then still in the National League North, and we thought we should do a story about them. And then so I contacted the club, and they said, yes, come over. And then I said, well, can I talk to anybody? Can I talk to one of the owners, And they said, yeah, we hope that Gary Neville will be there. He often is there. I hope he will be there on the day. And if he is, you can talk to him. Mm-hmm. So I traveled to Manchester, and it was very, very rainy and very, very cold and very, very unpleasant.
Just like Manchester.
And then I stood on this, makeshift newsstand that they had. And then suddenly Gary Neville comes up to me. And he said, well, listen, we can talk at halftime and after the game, but let's just watch the game now because, it's my club and I'm really into it. Okay. And I said, okay, yeah. So we watched the game together. And after a while, I noticed that he had 2 friends with him. So standing on my right was Gary Neville. And standing on my left was Ryan Giggs. And standing behind us was Dimitar Berbatov.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
And we were watching a game in the National League North. It was, I don't know, I think you can imagine that. It was a very unusual experience and very funny because Ryan Giggs is a very funny man. And Gary Neville was very, very excited. He was really, like a normal fan, like I would be when I'm watching Dortmund, He was convinced that, they would be hit on the break. And of course they were hit on the break. And it was a great afternoon.
I'll give you.
But you said, no, you said Dortmund games. Okay. It's, one game I always remember is for a very specific reason is we were playing Roma in the UEFA Cup, and it was the quarterfinal of the UEFA Cup in March 1993. That was after we'd won the cup in '89, which was sort of the start of the club's renaissance, but it was before we won all those league titles and the Champions League. So it was still a very young, fairly cheap team, and they were on their way to reaching the UEFA Cup finals against Juventus, which was really a really big thing and totally unexpected. So, and we'd lost the first leg away at Roma 1-0. And before the second leg, I broke my foot. I broke a foot, and my foot was in plaster. And for some reason, it never occurred to me that it could be kind of difficult to go onto the south stand, on crutches and, with your foot in plaster. I really thought, okay, my foot's broken, but that's all, we're playing on it was probably a Wednesday evening, so I'm going to the game. So I went to the game, and it was only when I was standing in front of the stand that it suddenly occurred to me, oh, how do I get up there? How do I actually get to my, to place? And it could be really, really crowded,
Yeah.
And it was so crowded that I couldn't, I was standing not, how do you say that? Not facing the pitch, but sideways.
Yeah.
It was so crowded. I had to stand sideways and watch over my shoulder, and on crutches. And I still remember when we scored the second goal. Of course, I lost my crutches and everything. I fell down. But people picked me up again. It was that kind of game. It was really amazing. So that's one of the games I always remember. I know another one, which might come as a bit of a surprise, is I went to a pre-season game in 2010, and I did that for When Saturday Comes. They have a series called More Than a Game, and it was between Dortmund and Manchester City.
Okay.
And there was, Klopp had been coaching Dortmund for 2 years, and we knew we were getting better. Mm-hmm. There was clearly a sense of improvement, but that was all. We're just getting better. Maybe I think most of us thought that maybe that season we would, if we were really lucky, we'd get into the UEFA Cup or the Europa League. So I went to the game. It was a preseason friendly, as I said. Man City had just signed. I remember that the bench was too small for Man City. They just signed a couple of players, and they had so many players that they couldn't all sit down on the bench. So and the game starts, and of course we knew that Man City had spent an awful lot of money on their players. They were really, really good. In Dortmund, we just running rings around them. Dortmund were really, really good and winning easily 3-1. And the best player on the pitch was Kagawa, who we just signed for 350,000 euros or whatever. And he was amazing. So, and I think everybody at the ground thought, God, are we really that good? Or is it just a preseason friendly? And Man City, they probably haven't had proper training sessions or whatever thing. But then the season starts, and it turned out we really were that good. It was Klopp's gegenpressing system, and the other teams just didn't know how to cope with that. And we basically ran away with the league. So that's two. Well, the third one is what most people. Almost everything we talked about today goes back to a game in 1986, because in 1986 we didn't have a lot of money. The club were in severe danger of going bankrupt, not for the first time and not for the last time. And although the team was quite good and quite expensive, which was one of the reasons for the financial problems, we just were fighting relegation all season long. And we ended up in 16th place. And at that time, there was a relegation promotion system in place. So Dortmund, the third worst team in the Bundesliga, played the third best team from the second Bundesliga. And that was Fortuna Cologne. Fortuna Cologne was it at the time. And the first leg was away at Cologne. And I didn't go there, but my brother went, of course. He went everywhere. And he came back and he said, we're going down. We lost 2-0, could have been 4-0. We're just rubbish. We're going down. So then it's the second game. There's the away goals rule didn't, there was no away goals rule. So we had, lose by 1 goal. Win by 1 goal, we're going down. Win by 3 goals, we stay up. And win by 2 goals, there will be a third game at a neutral ground. So in half time, we were trailing 1-0. So we now needed three goals. And in the second half of that game was still probably the defining moment for the modern Borussia Dortmund. Because if we'd gone down, we might not have come back, the entire team would have been dismantled, there was no money. And, or maybe if we'd come back, it would have been, 5 or 6 years later or whatever. And then we scored 2 goals, and then it was just the most amazing final 10 minutes I've ever seen. There was one corner after the other, but and Fortuna Cologne, they were actually, you could actually, sometimes you sense that when you're on the stand, that they were just totally knackered. They were impossible. There weren't even any counterattacks. They were just belting the ball away and hoping the clock would run down.
Yeah.
And then we scored the 3rd goal with the last kick of the game. It was the 90th minute, and we scored the 3rd goal, and there's a pitch invasion. Immediately after the goal. Well, not immediately after the goal, but all the Cologne players, they fell to the ground. And after the celebrations, and the referee ended the game. And immediately there was a pitch invasion, and people started carrying the president away and everything. And but we hadn't even stayed up, It was just, we just forced the 3rd game. But everybody felt that, after this game, everything's going to change, We're never going to lose the 3rd game, And so it was, yeah. But as you can imagine, it's people in front of me. I used that moment because in my book, because the young Lars Ricken was standing he was watching the game, standing directly behind the goal on the ground level where Dortmund scored that goal. And 11 years later, he scores the winning goal in the Champions League final, which is amazing, and to this day, very hard to believe.
That's an amazing story. So that's a fantastic way to finish there. So before you go, I just want to say a massive thank you for giving up your time and coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, sure. No, as I said, it was my pleasure. No problem.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
If you haven't already, please subscribe, follow and share. And of course, leave a 5-star rating.